All the budget went into that intro. Sons of the Forest is a video game. You may not believe it, but this is a video game that you can play. Truth be told, the lore in this game is quite of a spider web, and at the very least I will try to section parts of the video into very specific topics. That may include certain characters and that may include the plot altogether. If you look at the patch notes for Sons of the Forest in the 1.0 release, it seems that they added the entire game to the update. I gave this game another shot and I was actually pleasantly surprised and I enjoyed it thoroughly. It is a sequel to The Forest, along with the same exact atmosphere. I'm talking too much, let's just get right into the video.
Certified lover boy, certified pedophile.
That was so fucking cool what just happened. So let's touch on the prologue and then let's touch on the in-game story as well. Now, there are some things that I'm probably going to have to mention about the first Forest game, but for the most part we'll be focusing strictly on Sons of the Forest. So before the first Forest game, there was a man named Edward Puffton. Edward Puffton had a rival company known as Sahara Therapeutics. Edward had a weird fixation on ancient artifacts, and he also had a fixation on a golden cube. His fixation on these artifacts became so apparent and so rampant that he ordered mining operations to try to seek them out. He also tried to seek out a very rare metal. This metal, as far as we know, is only discovered on the island that we play on in Sons of the Forest. The mineral is known as solophyte. You can find this ore throughout the game as you play. Refined solophyte ore can turn into a brilliant looking gold, and can make a lot of objects that we use in our day-to-day lives. It can make tools and even armor. Edward Puffton also started the construction of a bunker community resort called Hollow Springs, although it's not entirely certain whether this was just a cover-up for the research they were doing on the island, or if he really did just feel like making a resort of some kind. It ended up being a research facility of sorts. This all still takes place before the first game of the Forest, mind you. Now, there was a Sahara Therapeutics employee named Hector Leader, and he emailed a Puffton Industries employee called Jackson I'm bad at names. He discovered Artifact 1. And then a few days later, the same Hector would go on to email about stone carvings of a suspected Artifact 2. After these emails and info spilled out, there was excavation and just research all across the board. Now, the cube I mentioned before, people were saying crazy shit like it could cause brief dimensional switch. We just so happen to notice too that there was mutated enemies all across this forest. So what gives and what created this? Well, according to the lore of the cube, when the dimensional switch would occur, the natives or just people outside of the cube would get mutated from it. Almost like a radiation side effect of sorts, but really bad. Now, the outsiders were all screwed and mutated, but the ones inside during the switch were actually safe and secure. Now, Edward Puffton had a daughter, Virginia Puffton. She was later mutated. As far as we can see visually, she has 3 legs instead of 2. There's 2 legs on one side and 1 leg on the other. Now, Edward Puffton loved Virginia a lot. He left everything in his will to her, and none to his wife, Barbara Puffton. Now we move on to the dining hall incident. Before the time frame of the Sons of the Forest began, Edward Puffton asked everyone to meet in the dining hall one night. He was meant to be there with Hank Keyes and a Gordon Langston. Now, unfortunately, this ended in a catastrophe when the cube activated, and like I stated before, the ones outside all get mutated, and it was a bloodbath. It was terrible. Everyone started to mutate, and they were no longer human. If you look at the dining hall tables in the room and you check some of the face cards, Hank Keyes seemed to have turned into a Fingers mutant, and Gordon Langston had turned into a Twins. Now, there's something called the Rattler Twins as well. They go by many different names, but probably you know it as Caterpillar. It is a much larger version of a 2 conjoined people mutant, and it is a very tough enemy. Unfortunately, we really don't know the identity of this one, but it is there. Edward Puffton became a blind mutant, a very common but very dangerous enemy. They're also known as puffies. Well, everyone's mutated and dead, or both. Because Edward Puffton was pretty much not human anymore and couldn't communicate through an email to save his life now, a contract that was supposed to go underway with his corporation just was put to a halt. So they sent in some people to go and look for him. And this is pretty much where we come in. There's 2 teams, Team A and B. But right before we touch into that, there's one more element that's pretty important. there was a group called Sons of the Stars. Now, these guys were pretty much just like a cult. They were weirdos and freaks. Now, you could see them scattered about the world sometimes, and they wear certain kinds of garbs and white dresses. There's a close to endgame area that you can go into called the residential bunker. You can pick up a camera from one of these so-called dead cultists. Now, you probably guessed it, but a loony cult, and a lot of them are dead, you probably had already known it was mass suicide. There was footage of everyone stabbing themselves repeatedly over and over to the point of death. Now, that all that prologue stuff is out of the way, let's finally touch on the actual story at hand in the game. Bitch! So, you work for Puffton Corporation, and you're traveling to where Edward Puffton was last, the island. You're in a helicopter, and you're ready to face whatever comes your way. Your protagonist does some typing on a keyboard, checks his wrist to see his tattoo, and out of nowhere, bullets start hitting the helicopter you're in. This causes it ultimately to crash. Now, I've only ever spawned in 2 locations in Sons of the Forest, and never the third, but there are 3 spawn locations that you can hit. The first one is the forest, shocker. You're essentially stuck inside a tree, you see your pilot die, you then begin to free yourself from the tree and you land on the floor, waking up much later. The second one is the mountains. You can crash over the mountains and you'll find yourself surrounded by snow. This obviously isn't ideal, as in the beginning you're probably not having too much good gear or any gear at all in order to shield yourself from the cold. And then the one that I feel is the most common is the beach. Helicopter plummeting straight into the water, you see that your buddies in the helicopter are all drowning. You luckily manage to escape, but then you get hit by somebody in the head. It is a man in a silver jacket. This mysterious man is, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that first name. I'll just call him Zhang. I'll be sure to make a character section of the video and we'll talk about him much in depth, but for now this is pretty much a brief synopsis of the story. So this is where your survival begins and this is where you go and forage. Luckily and unluckily, however, you meet somebody named Kelvin who is on your helicopter ride. He's alive, but he's deaf and mute, probably due to brain damage on the second part. You have to direct him and command him to do stuff by writing notes and making him read it. So you're running around the island and you're finding missing operatives. They have GPS tags on them, so you go off of those. Unfortunately, the island is really fucking massive compared to the first Forest game, so your running is probably going to take a while. And you're also trying to search for the Puffton family as well in the meantime. Now, this resort of sorts had a lot of different people, many walks of life. People who enjoyed pools, golf, you name it. The people staying at the resort were none the wiser of what was going on. The workers still kept expanding their stuff, looking for the mysterious minerals, and just continuing work as clockwork. You meet the daughter, Virginia Puffton, as you're playing. When I was playing it, I noticed that she kept running away, and I was like, how the fuck do I befriend her? I know I can. Ultimately, what ends up happening is that you have to try to protect her from a group of cannibals should they come into contact with you and her at the same time. She would feel comfort with you and then stay with you. You can even dress her up. The meat of the content you're going to see is pretty much just caves. These caves can just be caves, or they can lead to underground facilities. You find many great weapons, many different lore pieces, and just boss fights and things you need to progress to beat the game. These caves, however, balance the idea of loot with spam fucking you with a lot of dangerous enemies. Depending on the cave, probably not too bad, but it can also range to very bad. The operatives you find throughout the game also have decent tools that you can use to aid along yourself in the journey. This includes stuff like the flashlight, a pistol, and a shotgun. I will be sure to have a section on caves as well because there's a lot to talk about there. There's a bunker known as the Puffton Bunker. Now there's definitely key cards that you're going to need. These consist of stuff like the guest key, VIP key, and the maintenance key. But as you're going through this bunker, you meet Timmy or Timothy LeBlanc. Now if you played the first Forest game, you would know that Timmy was the son you were trying to rescue as a different character. You can actually meet Timmy's dad here very shortly in this cutscene, the guy you used to be playing as in the first game. His father, Eric LeBlanc, shows up, but then he gets shot by Zhang. This all happened while they were fighting a huge mutant. Very dangerous creature, but it knocked you unconscious, but it was dead by the time you woke up, so you're safe for now. This is pretty much where the ending phase comes into play. You find a golden ancient door, and Timmy's there banging on it, trying to figure out how the hell to open it. You see an arm of some sort, and you try to use your arm. Well, there's something called the ancient armor that you can find in one of the other caves within a very mysterious ship of sorts. Now, that is the armor that you're going to need, but you're going to need to spice it up a little bit first. There's a blueprint by the ancient gold door. You have to build this contraption and place a lot of sulfite ore in there, and it starts some sort of ritual. This ritual isn't just waiting around, though. You're going to have to be fighting many dangerous mutants that you face probably throughout your entire playthrough. This consists of pretty much every mutant that you can come across. I would highly recommend pretty much doing every other side facility before doing this one. The attachments for your guns, the shotgun, and a bunch of other stuff like the katana are very useful for combat. After you hopefully survive the onslaught, you get the new piece of decked out armor, all juiced up and ready to be used on the door. The door opens and you and Timmy venture further into this magma-filled cave system. Now this is where you start venturing even deeper and you find a huge demon, in which case he knocks Timmy away from you and you'll have to finish the job on the mutant. After we catch up to Timmy, we find the artifact, the cube that can switch dimensions apparently. If Kelvin and Virginia are alive, they can be seen squeezing into the box behind you. Now the man Zhang tries to enter the box but doesn't reach it in time. He gets locked out and we all know what happens to people outside of the cube when it activates. You see strange visions of an alternate reality of sorts, a utopia with high cybernetic enhancements like flying cars. There's bolts of lightning and huge skyscrapers for miles. After the cube opens, you notice that Zhang has mutated into a huge pile of flesh, probably one of the worst mutants you've ever seen on the island. This is where a bloody boss battle begins, and to be honest, I just spammed 5 grenades and killed him instantly. Now you have two options. You have two options when everything is over. You're getting attacked by cannibals and you have very little time to make a choice. Now your gear comes flying off your back and onto the island, and then shortly after that you see an artifact floating in front of you, guiding you towards the island. You can get 3 different achievements based on what you choose. If you leave the island, you'll get the Fought Demons achievement. Staying on the island will give you the Fight Demons achievement. But if you complete the story with Kelvin and Virginia alive, you'll get the Keep Your Friends Close achievement. Me personally, I just said fuck it, hopped off the island. This is where you see some cutscenes, which I'll probably play right here. I will shorten some of them down just for brevity's sake.
I need you to help me. It's getting worse. Look at me. Look at what I'm turning into. I need your help.
I've told you I can't help you.
And what about with this?
Solified. Where did you get this?
So yes, I guess the brain injury thing with Kelvin was true, as you can see from the ending cutscene. Now, I know what you were wondering during the gameplay if you hadn't played the first Forest game, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to talk about the first Forest game a little bit. So yes, Timmy looked like he was mutating, which he was. He is a mutant of sorts. This is because in the ending of the first Forest game, you find him pretty much dead inside of a resurrection chamber of sorts. Timmy was used as a specimen as a small kid to bring back the life of a smaller girl, Megan. The dad, Eric LeBlanc, however, was not having this, and he found a way to bring Timmy back through the resurrection chamber. This, however, didn't end as expected, as Timmy seemed to have gotten seizures from it and maybe slight brain damage. There was a cutscene in the first Forest game, post-credits, of him on a TV show showing that the family had survived, and it shows the whole seizure and everything going down. Now, the Megan chick convulsed and had a seizure the same exact way, which, if you put 2 and 2 together at the time, we'd think that he was going to turn into a mutant during the TV show. This, however, was not the case, as when the full release happened, there was a alternate cutscene of sorts, and it showed the dad consoling Timmy, and he stopped having a seizure. It even showed Timmy all grown up later in a next cutscene, in his own apartment, talking about something called Site 2 on his walls. But what brings the mutant aspect into this is that he starts to look at his arm, and his skin kind of starts bubbling. Timmy thought that when he was in the cube and it activated, it was supposed to cure him of his mutated ailments. This, however, did not happen, as you can see from the post-credits cutscene. Now, since I had personally left the island as the choice, I was able to see what was going on with Timmy after we left the island, and it wasn't good. For those cutscenes, however, there was an aftermath of what was going on. We can see this in the credits scene when they start rolling. The Doctor was intrigued by the solo fight, however, and maybe there was something that could happen there. And I guess it seemed to have been the case because Timmy even began to start his own pharmaceutical companies. He was a business owner and he was proud of it. But apparently later on he seemed to have gone missing. It really doesn't state why he went missing or how. He goes on to buy Site 2, which is essentially just the island that we escaped from. He goes back to mine as much Solophyte ore as he can because it is a very rare and valuable mineral. Going missing on Site 2, we can probably deduce though that he probably either had finished mutating and is no longer human, or he's just hiding out and trying to plan something for some odd reason, who knows. He seems to have powers and abilities that he can control with his mutations, however. He has one arm that is very large and bulbous, and he seems to be able to control this and grow it in size in order to inflict high amounts of damage onto enemies. It increases his physical strength clearly, and it seems to be very useful in combat. Now, let's touch on something else. Let's touch on the various different endings. You see, I only went and got a small handful of the artifact pieces, but there is an artifact ending of sorts, and that's pretty much just staying on the island. And if you agree to do that, Timmy says, no, don't do it, and he just says you're on your own and they leave. There's also other cutscenes, and unfortunately I didn't have Virginia close to the end game cave, which is what causes it to trigger. She has extra limbs, but we also don't really know if this was the effects of the cube. There's an ending of her in an operating room of sorts, and then after that, she seems to have 2 legs and 2 arms. People wonder and complain about why she had to have them removed, and it's probably just to fit into society or something. But we can see that she's pregnant, and Kelvin's in the back seat, and they're jamming out to a car on just some trip. So I know this brings us to the most important topic of them all. The main character smashed Virginia. Sorry. So now that we touched on the various endings and the important post-credits and after-credit stuff, let's dive a little bit deeper on some of the characters. Virginia's room consisted of a very childlike looking area and had a ballet practice area as well. This is very interesting as we can see by Virginia's appearance that her toes and feet seem to be fused together in the shape of ballet slippers. Her behavior in the forest is kind of interesting. She can eat and kick rabbits to death, and she can eat berry bushes. You can equip her with various weapons, including a pistol, shotgun, and a GPS locator. Like I had said previously, you can also dress her up in outfits. This ranges from pretty much the outfits that you can collect upon your journey. To gain her trust, you just have to do a bunch of various acts that are just kind to her. This includes maybe rezzing her while she is down, protecting her from enemies that she's fearful of, and letting her eat from drying racks or crops that you grow in your own base. And these are just to name a few, but there are more. You'll know when she is taking kindly to you as she just doesn't really run away. She also has friendly smiles and friendly gestures she does. Now let's touch on Barbara Puffton. She was the mother to Virginia Puffton and the wife to Edward Puffton. She is one of the mid-game bosses that you can fight in the dining hall along with Edward Puffton. They are both highly mutated puffies, and very tough ones at that. Much like every other mutant in the dining hall and pretty much on the island, she was mutated after Golden Cube is activated. But honestly, the reason I don't have much to say about her is because there isn't much to say about her. She's pretty much the mother to other major characters that you can actually see in the game, and she was mutated, simple as that. Now let's discuss Zhang, because I did mention I was going to talk about him a little bit more in depth. He used to be a corporate lawyer for Puffton Corporation, but then he turned into a spy or operative of sorts for Sahara Therapeutics, the Puffton Corporation's rival company. Being the first human outside of the squad that you see on the island when you awake and also being knocked out by being pistol whipped, you can very much guess he is the antagonist or a villain of sorts. He wasn't too fond of the idea of the cube and the strange structures on the island, along with obviously the numerous dead bodies, corpses, and what have you. A lot of the workers also died or disappeared mysteriously too, so that didn't really help Zhang's mental state. The Puffton Corporation workers pretty much kept an eye on Zhang as they didn't know whether he would lose it. But ultimately Zhang just said screw it and this is just made up and stupid and schizophrenic as fuck. But when the Sons of the Stars recently started coming in and doing mass suicides and just being a creepy cult, Zhang took it upon himself to just execute some of these members. Zhang was inside body cam footage of one of these cult massacres, and Edward wanted him fired and off the island immediately. Zhang got booted off the island, but this actually saved him momentarily because this is when the cube had activated and killed everyone in the dining hall. But Zhang decided to come back to the island because of Sahara Therapeutics and bring their own squad or team of sorts to find out what happened to Puffton. So basically you have the rival company Sahara Therapeutics and the Puffton Corporation, us, on the same island looking for them. There are notes scattered around the world of Zhang saying that he wanted to become rich from the cube and wanted to kill Edward Puffton and maybe the whole Puffton family if possible. He shows up in a total of 3 cutscenes altogether for being a major character. I was walking around the entertainment bunker and I noticed that there was a room with monitors on it and it had Zhang's face on it, labeling him as a security threat. There were warnings about him and his possible affiliation to Sahara Therapeutics. That's pretty much his backstory and the little details about him, because everything else I would explain was already explained in the in-game story. But there is some smaller tidbits about him. We can probably assume he was the one who helped shoot down the helicopter because he appeared right as soon as we crashed. There were other Sahara Therapeutics operatives in the dining hall area right before the boss scene between the Puftons would ensue. The mutants pretty much didn't care about Zhang and the operatives and instead focused on us. This let Zhang and the operatives escape by diving into the water outside of the dining hall. Let's talk a little bit more on Kelvin. So we pretty much talked about a pretty big portion of him. He was heavily brain damaged and the ending cutscenes confirm that. He is essentially just a child in a man's body. His cognitive abilities are probably that of a 4th grader or even younger. He is a very invaluable asset, however, and he can get downed and killed. You can command him to follow you, build shelters, fires, collect sticks, logs, stones for you, and a bunch of other stuff. He also might help you not feel as alone in the forest. You can dress him up as well. Now, apparently the developers had compared Virginia and Kelvin to the idea of cats and dogs, which unfortunately I can kind of understand because you're commanding Kelvin around like a dog. Kelvin may not even be his real name, as if you look in the game files or the game console, his name appears to be Robbie in them. This is just speculation, but it's something really big that people debate about. Also, it is simply just a name tag on his vest, and there's another guy called Fisheye in the helicopter next to him. There are a lot of weird names out there, but I doubt the guy's name was actually Fisheye. So who's to say Kelvin isn't his real name as well? After doing some more digging on this, there were some people saying his name was Robert Kelvin, so Kelvin could be his last name. And if this doesn't seem to be the case, it might be a nickname. What I decided I was going to do for this section of the video was talk about locations. And there are quite a bit of locations, and I'll just be telling you the main good stuff in there and maybe what it contains. These include caves, abandoned mining structures, and what have you. There are pings for the caves in the shape of red little markers on the map. So we'll start with the Rebreather Cave. The Rebreather Cave contains the Rebreather, stun gun, and the leather jacket. It is located on the northeastern shore, and the Rebreather is a very important item and pretty much what you need to progress through the game to beat it. The Rebreather helps you dive underwater for extended periods of time, and there are air tanks scattered throughout the world. The stun gun is also very nice, although I didn't really use it, I mainly used the stun baton instead. If you do a lot of digging in the cave, you can find a laptop that you can interact with, which will show you the location of the entertainment bunker as well. This cave, as far as I recall, isn't too bad compared to the other ones, definitely. There are a handful of puffies and a couple fingers, and if you're not well equipped, you could take some heavy damage or even be down, but honestly, maximum amount of bone armor, not even creepy, is needed, if you're good at dodging that is, and taking them out quickly. Next we have the rope gun cave. Now this is a very interesting cave with another item that I really didn't use a whole lot, which I probably should have, but that is the rope gun. It is said to be needed as a vital tool to access the shovel cave. However, I didn't really need to use the rope gun to access the shovel area of the cave. There was already a piece of rope that I could slide upon. This is also home to the cross item, and at first I was able to hold it and shine it at people, and I was making jokes like, what, are we gonna have a poltergeist or something? And in a sense, yes, I guess. There is a certain enemy in this game known as a demon. I mentioned them briefly in the Hell Caves area, but basically if you hold the cross up at them and kind of show it at them, they get set on fire. They try to move away from you, but they still get lit on fire and eventually die. A few clicks with the cross at them, and they'll usually be dead in seconds. Like I said, don't worry about getting hit when you're holding the cross up at the demons, and very good repellent. There is a sluggy enemy, which is just a big amalgamation of just a pile of flesh. Now, in order to access the next part of the cave, you're going to need to get rid of the sluggy. Now, there are some materials next to the sluggy that you can probably help to blow it up, which is exactly what I did. I hadn't used my grenades for anything when I was looting other corpses around the island, so one grenade is literally just enough to blow up the sluggy. Although the sluggy is stuck between 2 rocks in this portion of the cave, it can still do damage to you if you get too close. Like I said, you could blow it up, which is probably the quickest and easiest method, just stand back, or you could deplete its health through other means by using weapons. Honestly, you could probably get rid of its health completely with a crafted spear, just take a lot of poking and time. Now the enemies here might be a little bit more plentiful. They contain pretty much the same thing as Rebreather, Fingers, and Puffies. They have twins mutants, and they have a little bit of mutant babies thrown in there. You'll soon find out in a majority of the caves they just like throwing a batch of mutant babies for no reason other than to just piss you off and annoy you. They're relatively harmless, their damage is pretty negligible, negligible if you're wearing armor especially. Now I'd like to mention there's an exit portion of this cave in which the twins reside in. There are two of them to be exact, and they like to run around the walls. Me personally, I took probably like 10 minutes straight trying to throw Molotovs at them and waiting for them to come closer without having to jump down. But I'm pretty sure I just opted out for trying to throw grenades and shooting them and wasting ammo. If you time things just right and you're quick enough and their positioning is also pretty good, you can just downright ride the zip line and sprint out of that bitch. Now let's touch on the Shovel Cave. The Shovel Cave is kind of on the northwestern side of the mountain, and I had missed it completely in my playthrough, but there are dead operatives scattered throughout the cave somewhere, and you can find a slingshot on one of their corpses. The rebreather is needed to access the shovel area of the cave. I say this, but honestly, there is a way to get around it. You see, the forest never had the greatest mechanics when it came to scaling things. It has kind of like the Skyrim treatment where you could literally just run up the steep sides of a mountain if you wanted to. You can get past the rope gun requirement by the entrance of the cave. You jump onto a small ledge on the right side of the gap, and then you pretty much just spam jump and keep doing that. But like I said, you get the shovel in here, which is a very useful item. You use it to dig up many different bunkers with many different great resources and lore places. You use it to dig up one of the Team B members as well and claim the shotgun, which is just a very OP and amazing weapon. Now, the enemies, however, contain puffies, fingers, legsies, and mutant babies. Now, I hadn't really touched on the legsies a whole lot, but you've probably seen it in some of the footage I played back. They are, well, a mutant that mainly consists of legs. They have legs sticking out of the top of their body, and they're actually pretty tough. To combat this toughness, however, if you kill it and you manage to skin it, you get 2 creepy armor instead of 1 from other mutants like fingers, for example. You can find other things throughout this cave, such as a wetsuit and a pistol flashlight attachment. Now, initially, you might be really confused on this portion of the cave because you found the shovel and you don't know how to escape. I was trying to search for areas to escape from because when I found the area with the shovel in it, there seemed to be a giant building on the other side. I attempted to use the rope gun, but nothing. I attempted to find a different route, but nothing. I was really surprised there wasn't a second way out. Usually there's a second exit of sorts in these caves. I took the long way around again, started diving again, and heading back towards the entrance I came in from, I guess. But this seems to have been an intentional thing because there's a scripted moment after you get all the items, in which a sluggy breaks from a wall, but it still gets stuck, so you can just blow it up or attack it until it's dead again. And this is where the interesting second exit comes into play. There's actually a second exit behind the sluggy if you manage to kill it or blow it up, so I guess there was a second exit all along. This is definitely one of the largest caves in the game. There was a lot of running involved for me, and there was a lot of twisty turny paths. There's also a whole lot of dangers, so be very wary of that, but they counteract this with some pretty decent loot. I should have mentioned it in the beginning, but definitely go to the rebreather cave first, and then probably go to the rope gun one second. This is because both of those items are very crucial to exploring some of the larger cave systems, and a majority of the entrances and bunkers and locations altogether. There are a lot of lore sightings within this cave, and there are a lot of demons within this cave as well. This is why I highly recommend going to the other rope gun area cave in order to get the cross just to easily TKO these guys. Hypothetically speaking, you could just do everything first, go to the shovel cave, get the shovel, and dig up the shotgun, in which case you could probably just fire at will on these demons, but that's a waste of ammo in my opinion. Cross was pretty much designed to be a repellent for these demons. There is a ship of sorts in the area of the cave with lightning protruding from the ceiling, and I got a Discord ping. There's a back entrance to the ship with a lot of wood planks on it. This is similar to many of the other wood planks you can find on the entrances of the caves. Just hit it with a weapon and you'll break them. Go within the cave, you might find some decent resources to aid you on your journey, but most importantly, there is a dead man at the front of the cockpit of the ship. Loot the corpse in the cockpit and you'll get the golden armor, which is needed to beat the game. There's also a dead operative covered in webs hanging on the ceiling entering through the eastern entrance of this cave system. Now, the reason this guy is important is because he has a rifle on him. I unfortunately passed up this guy and didn't pick up the rifle, but the shotgun was more than enough for my journey. Also, after you pass the spaceship area and you venture deep into the cave system, but there is an alien-like structure past these demons somewhere in the cave system, and if you go on top of it, you'll find an artifact piece, 1 of 7. You can also find night vision goggles within this cave. There's many different mutants, though, besides just demons, and I highly recommend you bring a lot of armor and protection. These consist of puffies, tanky puffies, twins, fingers, demons, and mutant babies. Now, the tanky puffies are just puffies, but they do so much fucking damage, and they knock you back on your ass when they hit you. So it's a bit of a stun lock of sorts, and they can also smack you when you're down and trying to get back up. Definitely an enemy you should try to avoid the hits from at all costs. Now we have the Hell Caves. This was one of the main caves I mentioned briefly in the in-game story portion of the video. You'll know why it's called Hell Caves because there's lava and magma pouring from the ceiling and pools of it scattered on the floor. This is also home to many demons. This is essentially the endgame area of the game, and this is the point of no return, so to speak. Now, it's not technically a cave on the map. It is located behind the luxury bunker in the Puffton living quarters behind the bathroom. You'll have to find and seek out this luxury bunker location location by going through the other bunkers and lost areas. This is also where the golden cube is, the one that we mentioned that can just ruin the island pretty much. According to the 1.0, they made Timmy a much more involved character within the story. He appears in many more cutscenes and he also aids you on your Hell Cave's journey, and he has his own pistol with infinite ammo to shoot the demons for you. Not much to say about the cave lootable wise, there's not many lootables, if any, and the enemies really just consist of demons and the big kind of mini boss demon you have to fight. It's kind of a walk and it's a little bit tedious, especially if Timmy's AI bugs out on you, but that's essentially those caves. Then we have the Solophyte Cave. Now I mentioned the Solophyte is a very rare mineral that Edward Puffton pretty much went crazy on mining operations for. This is where you find the Solophyte Upgrader building, but you have to discover its blueprint first, which is in this cave. Now if you've located the golf course on the island, the cavern is located just southwest of that. This is used to just solophytify every tool that you possibly can think of pretty much. These include things like axes, machetes, even the guns, but there's not limited to just those. You can also upgrade your armor and even bone armor. There's quite a bit of tedious materials to try to grab for this building, and I'll try to name them off for you. These consist of 4 golf cart batteries, 3 turtle shells, 7 stones, 11 sticks, and 3 wires. Now, what exactly does this Solophyte upgrade do? Well, if it's a weapon, it pretty much just gives it a flat damage bonus of about 30%. This isn't just an easy process of upgrading things so easily, however. Lightning strikes will start to hit the machine, and there is a whole process that takes time. Highly recommend getting good preparations before upgrading anything. It summons waves of mutants that you can probably discover through your day-to-day cave experiences. They will try to attack you and murder you. You just pretty much have to hold off for an extended period of time and kill them. I almost forgot to mention it about the Solophyte cave, but you can also find a pickaxe within this cave. There's also a pocket of Solophyte ore that you can mine with said pickaxe. You also get a piece of the strange artifact from this cave as well. I will attempt to speedrun the rest of the locations as they are pretty miscellaneous, some of them, and they're just there for the loot. There's obviously the There's the helicopter crash site, which is pretty much where you start the game from. It's a pretty well-known area, I'm assuming if you've started the game. You see Kelvin, some loot boxes, and just the helicopter. Now let's touch on the bunkers. You have the printer slash entertainment bunker. It's called a printer bunker as well because it contains a 3D printer, which is used to aid you with many interesting items that you can only craft with a printer. The entertainment bunker consists of a lot of interesting stuff, such as bars, pools, and what have you. You can find a guitar in here, and you can find a guest key card. You can find an electric chainsaw as well, and a shotgun rail. You can find the location of maintenance bunker B in this bunker. Next, we have the food and dining bunker. This is obviously the food and dining bunker that is part of the dining hall incident, in which case you'll be the one having to fight the Puffdens as they have turned into Puffies for a mini boss fight of sorts. You can find the location to this bunker in maintenance bunker A. There's quite a handful of mutants here, some babies, some fingers, and what have you. They try to prep you with some loot as well before the boss fight if you look hard enough. After you defeat the Puffdens, if you go into the water, and you have the rebreather as well, which I'm assuming you do by now, there is a long underwater corridor that leads to an exit of sorts, but first you have to fight some Puffies and mutant babies. The loot here is also home to the crossbow, which is a very good weapon, and you can honestly two-shot some of the normal mutants with these in the chest. There are 3 maintenance bunkers as well, A, B, and C, and we've already touched on A and B. But for the most part, there's pretty decent loot here, and there's some miscellaneous items that you can grab on your journey. To even access these bunkers, however, you're going to need the shovel from the shovel cave to dig up the entrance. All of these bunker entrances are under a pile of dirt in which you're going to have to shovel your way to. For the most part, I'm just going to be naming off the enemies and items you can find in these maintenance bunkers to speedrun it. You can find a 3D printer, a firefighter axe, which is a very good melee weapon, and a laser sight attachment, as well as a tuxedo outfit. You can also find the maintenance key card in here to aid you on your journey. This is also where you can find a laptop with the location to the food and dining bunker. The only enemies in here are a handful of mutant babies, nothing too serious. Now we have maintenance bunker B, southwest of the big dig site on the island. It is located within one of the many cannibal villages as well. You'll most likely have to fight your way to the entrance. You get a 3D printer in here as well with a bunch of resin. You get a compound bow and a silencer attachment as well. Compound bow I pretty much didn't use, I mainly just used the crossbow. And you'll also gain access to the maintenance bunker C location through here. Now, maintenance bunker C. Located within the golf course area, it has one of my favorite guns that I finally found, which is the revolver. It is pretty much a pistol, just way stronger. Some other supplies here, but no hostile enemies. Now we have the residential bunker. It is east of the largest lake on the map. This is where you find also another very interesting melee weapon, the katana. Now in Forest 1 it was pretty shitty, you'd have to hit something like 6 or 7 times in order to down them. But it would slice fast. Now they upgraded the katana in this game thankfully so that you could pretty much sever their arms in 1 or 2 slices, hindering them completely dead or useless. You can also find another pistol within this bunker. As of the first update, however, it requires all all 3 keycards. There's a surveillance room at the end of a corridor in this bunker. This is where the luxury bunker door can be found and unlocked. There is a GPS location for the luxury bunker too, and it can be unlocked on a laptop in the same residential room you find the spacesuit in. The residential bunker has a lot of rooms that are wide open. There are a handful of enemies guarding here and there, but they're nothing too crazy that you've already fought before. It could probably consist of maybe a handful of mutant babies and maybe a fingers at the most. We've already talked about the luxury bunker because of the case of the Hell Caves, but we'll just repeat it a little bit for now. This is the place with the bathroom that you can go behind to find the ancient golden door with Timmy waiting for you. This is obviously where you use the souped up ancient armor to unlock the door. This is essentially just a buffer bunker of sorts before you get to the last endgame area, and there's hardly anything noteworthy to even mention that you can pick up from the cave. And now let's talk about quest locations. There are many quest locations, and most of them consist of just finding Team B. One of your first tasks might just be trying to run to those locations to see what's up. You have the survival raft first, which is pretty good. You have to swim out to the survival raft by the side of a beach. You have to swim to a certain side of it in order to trigger a cutscene of you climbing on top of it and getting inside. This is where you'll find one of the dead Team B members, but it's also where you find a pistol. There's only one piece of danger on the way to the raft, and you probably guessed it, it is a shark hovering around. What I ended up doing, however, was I think I had a little bit of bone armor on at the time, so it was negligible damage and it didn't affect my main health at all. I jumped into the raft, picked up the pistol, and then found the shark swimming in the water and shot it a bunch until it started floating. Next we have the shotgun grave. Probably going to be one of the last Team B spots that you actually loot. You're going to need the shovel to dig up the corpse. This is where you find the shotgun, hence the name shotgun grave. There's also a little bit of cloth and maybe some other items within the coffin. And next we have the cliff. This is where you find the other Team B operative. The Team B operative was caught on a piece of rope stuck to a rock on the top of a cliff. All you have to do is try to find a climbable portion of the mountain and scale it a little bit. Then you get to the top of the cliff, which will have a little bit of resources, but most notably the rope. What you do here is snap the rope by hitting it. I used one of the utility or modern axes, I forget which one, and I'm unsure if using a blunt weapon of sorts could do the same thing. I'm assuming it could. But after you do that and the rope's broken, he falls to the ground, in which you climb back down the cliff, in which you see his corpse. Very sad death. But he has a flashlight attachment on his corpse, a very useful light item. There's also some miscellaneous locations you could probably find if you just run around the island trying to find the bunkers and the caves. This consists mainly of random graves scattered throughout the world that you can grave rob using your shovel. You can find cannibal camps and even abandoned camps. That is to say, these items aren't something you should just ignore if you need resources, however. These are very plentiful and some pretty good items. These may include but are not limited to things like tape, bones, and cloth, very useful things for crafting bigger items. There is also some beached kayaks up on the shore. You can loot these to get binoculars and a camouflage suit. You can also find things like mass graves, and you can usually just find pretty basic items like rope and cloth. There are also things called cultist yachts in this game. You probably guessed it, but these were owned by the Sons of the Stars cultists at some point. These yachts may contain some lore pieces to just better understand the motives for these cultists. There are a few beached yachts, and unfortunately these also have cannibal villages nearby, so it might prove to be a very difficult and dangerous place to scavenge. There is one yacht called the Good Times. There are a lot of notable lore pieces such as a tape and some letters to people. There is a dead corpse in the Good Times saying non-believer stabbed into his chest. This highly alludes to the possibility that he was stabbed by his own cultist buddies because he started to not believe. There's also another yacht called the Evening Star. This contains more lore pieces such as letters, and even a set of pajamas. Now there is one on the South Beach, but it doesn't have a name to the ship. Now how do we know this is a cultist though? It could just be some random sailor. Well, there's a lot of blood in it, and a lot of body parts around it. Not to mention there was drawings of bunker locations and a blazer outfit. So I guess we're going to try to touch on some of the cannibals and mutants in the game. I've mentioned a lot of the mutants, but I didn't really mention the cannibals. There are quite a bit of enemies, and I will try to name them off and try to give a brief synopsis of a group of them. So we have male cannibals, female cannibals, golden masked cannibals, brutes, and muddy cannibals. We have titans, painted cannibals, blazing cannibals, spearmen, torchmen, effigy cannibals, frenzied cannibals, charging cannibals, and cannibal assassins. A majority of these cannibals, however, just spawn close to day one or on day one. The regular cannibals aren't really special, but the spearmen and blazing and stuff like that do have their own quirks. Like blazing cannibals, for example. They're pretty rare, but they set themselves on fire, hence the name blazing cannibal. This, however, isn't ideal, as when they charge at you and attempt to hit you, it spreads the fire onto you, causing flame damage. Then there's things like spearmen, which throw spears, torchmen, which pretty much are equipped with a flashlight or a torch of some kind. Then we have effigy cannibals, which when they place their effigy, it acts as a sort of rendezvous beacon for all the other cannibals to come towards. There are a lot of other cannibals, and their whole gimmick is just being tough and doing a lot of damage. And those usually include like titans, brutes, charging, and frenzied cannibals. I group those guys into the same category pretty much because they're big and tanky and they do a lot of damage. damage. So there's not too much to cover in the mutant department because I did talk about a lot of them. But just to recap, we have the regular puffies in the cave, we have the tanky puffies, also known as blue puffies. Now I can't find any images on this one, but it is called a spotty, and it usually spawns around day 40. Very late game, very aggressive, and very high level and tanky. It's called spotty because apparently it resembles that of polka dots on it. Then we have fingers. Pretty basic mutant, pretty easy to dodge when you learn its attack pattern. If you keep your distance, it attempts to charge at you. Try to maintain a pretty safe distance, but also don't stray too far so it can charge. If you're within melee range of a fingers, it usually consists of the same attacks it does. This includes a 2-piece, this includes a 3-piece. And by that I mean a 2-hit combo or a 3-hit combo. So you just wait it out and hit them once, repeat the process until it's dead. Then we have the twins. They're pretty beefy, but they're not too bad. They run pretty fast and they try to do a lot of damage to you. I don't bother using melee weapons on this guy because it is pretty difficult. That being said, however, there's no harm in trying to stun it. But just be aware the higher rank enemies and mutants usually don't have a very long lasting stun duration as compared to regular cannibals or puffies. Then we have mutant babies, which is literally just like, dude, literally you can hit them with like probably the weakest weapon in the game and they'll die in one hit, honestly, and they go flying backwards when you hit them anyways. They have to be sitting on the ground looking at you within your vicinity for like 3 straight seconds before they decide to jump at you and attack you. Their damage isn't really anything special, and you're probably going to have some sort of armor on, minimum leaf armor. They're big pushovers. They're very small though, so their hitboxes might take some getting used to. Then you have a caterpillar, which I've mentioned previously, a conjoined sort of mutant. Very tanky though and very scary. They have a lot of attacks that are hard to dodge. Then we have sluggies. These guys don't spawn naturally. I mentioned a couple of the sluggies, and a couple of them really just spawn in cutscenes or in caves stuck in the walls. These guys are pretty much scripted spawns, so there's not really much to worry about with them, no danger really. There are a small handful of late game enemies. Well, what's the difference between late game and day 40? Well, late game is pretty much just determined by whether you stay on the island after completing the game. They consist of creepy Virginias, Armsies, and a demon boss. The demon boss, we've already fought one in the Hell Cave, so you already know what that looks like. The creepy Virginia and the Armsy are pretty much just very nostalgic throwbacks of the first Forest game. They were, if not one of the most dangerous batches of enemies to fight in the Forest game. Now, if they're bringing back enemies from the first Forest game, well, what about the Cowman? Where is he? Unfortunately, rip the Cowman in Sons of the Forest, he did not make his way into the sequel. However, there was some sort of spiritual successor of sorts that made his way in. That is known as the Holy. It is called a Holy because it has holes on its body and it resembles a huge mass of just limbs and holes. It has pretty much the same kind of attacks as a Cowman. It charges a little bit and does a belly flop. But this is also an incredibly tanky mutant. It'll take many shotgun shots and even a few grenades maybe to seal the deal on it. I've already mentioned the Legsy, but there's also a couple other hostile enemies that are a little miscellaneous. I've already mentioned the shark, but there just so happens to be orcas in this game as well. Thankfully they can be killed, but they come closer to the shoreline than a shark. This means that they are relatively more dangerous. On the topic of deep sea hostile creatures, however, I forgot to mention that there is a shark that is swimming in the water next to the rebreather when you find it in the rebreather cave. Well, I hope you enjoyed. I enjoy making these kinds of videos. I like yapping, so it's a plus for me. But the issue is I really can't do this on a whole lot of videos. There's a couple of reasons. One, mainly because I hardly find video games that really pique my interest as much as to over-explain them. And two, if I was to find a game to over-explain, it's probably already been done 300 times, and it wouldn't really be worth it. But nonetheless, I'm talking too much again. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you stick around for maybe more videos like these or whatever else I have planned in the future. I love y'all. Take care.